Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because wow, we are diving headfirst into a true digital thriller. We're going to unpack the anatomy of one of the most devastating, rapid-fire cyber events in human history. I'm talking about the WannaCry Ransomware attack of May 2017. Okay, so let's jump right into this. We're going to break down exactly how a stolen intelligence weapon essentially transformed a standard piece of malware into an absolute global catastrophe.
To really understand this, picture this scene. It's midnight, you're in a dim hotel room in Dalian, China. A programmer named Park is sitting in a deep trance in front of his glowing screen. He has literally been working for 5 straight days, barely sleeping, just grabbing quick meals at the hotel restaurant. Now, he's on a high-stakes mission for his superiors back in North Korea, but he's failing. His code just isn't doing what it needs to do, and, well, failure in his line of work brings some pretty severe consequences. He isn't furiously typing away like a hacker in a Hollywood movie. Instead, he's methodically scouring hacker forums and the dark web. He is desperately searching for the one missing piece to his puzzle.
Which brings us to a frankly terrifying question. How do you create a monster? And that's not just a dramatic hook for us today, it's the literal technical challenge Park was facing in that hotel room. He had the basics of a malicious program mapped out, sure, but to unleash the kind of global havoc his bosses demanded, he needed a master key. He needed a recipe for a full-scale digital catastrophe.
Because, you see, Park wasn't just acting alone in a vacuum here. North Korea's cyber capabilities have been escalating for years. If you look back between 2009 and 2013, they were running denial-of-service attacks, dropping Trojans to shut down banks and TV stations in Seoul. By 2014, they escalated to the infamous Sony Pictures hack, stealing unreleased movies and private emails as retaliation for a comedy film. Then, things took a more pragmatic turn. In 2015 and 2016, they went strictly after the money, most notably trying to steal $1 billion in the Bangladesh bank heist. They ended up making off with $100 million. So they were disciplined, they were persistent, and they were dangerously effective. But for their 2017 operation, they needed something bigger. And that missing piece Park eventually found? It was a tool called EternalBlue. And what's truly mind-blowing is the origin of this thing. EternalBlue wasn't built by some rogue hacker syndicate. It was a highly advanced cyber weapon developed by the United States National Security Agency. It exploited this really obscure vulnerability in the SMBv1 protocol, which is just a system Windows computers use to share files on a network. Essentially, it allowed for remote code execution on unpatched Windows machines. The NSA had been hoarding this secret since 2012. But then, a mysterious group called the Shadow Brokers stole these tools and dumped them right onto the open internet. A cybersecurity firm reversed engineered it on a public forum, and literally days later, Park and his colleagues stumbled upon it. It was the ultimate battering ram.
But here's the thing, a battering ram isn't enough on its own, right? You also need a way to move your troops inside once the door is down. So the really crucial point here is how EternalBlue worked perfectly with a second leaked NSA tool called Double Pulsar. Double Pulsar is essentially a highly stealthy backdoor. So if EternalBlue kicks the door down, Double Pulsar quietly props it open and hides in the shadows. It establishes this undetectable tunnel that connects the attacker directly to the victim. It doesn't actually cause damage itself. Rather, think of it as a quiet smuggler's route used to quietly drop the actual nasty payload, the ransomware, right into the system.
And this brilliantly illustrates why this specific combination was so uniquely devastating. Because traditional malware, it relies on human error. Someone has to click a bad link in a phishing email or download a shady attachment, right? We've all been warned about that. But WannaCry, armed with EternalBlue, required absolutely zero human interaction. None. It was a self-propagating worm. Once it infected just one single machine, it actively scanned both local networks and the entire internet for other vulnerable unpatched systems, and it just broke into them automatically. It moved completely on its own.
So, let's break down the 3-step anatomy of this disaster. Step 1. EternalBlue breaks through the defenses of an unpatched computer. Step 2. Double Pulsar instantly sets up that stealthy backdoor tunnel. Step 3. The WannaCry payload is smuggled right through, deploying encryption algorithms that immediately turn every single file on the computer into total gibberish. And actually, just to be utterly ruthless, it then deletes the computer's shadow copies, making it incredibly difficult to ever recover those files without paying for the decryption key. It was just a flawless, automated, perfect storm.
Which resulted in this terrifying message popping up on screens all over the world on May 12, 2017. Oops, your files have been encrypted. The infamous red screen ransom note.
It gave victims 3 days to send $300 worth of Bitcoin and threatened that in 7 days, their files would be lost forever. Imagine just sitting down at your desk, sipping your morning coffee, and seeing this lock up your entire life's work. Panic is inevitable.
And the scale of this panic? Absolutely unprecedented. 200,000. That is the estimated number of computers hijacked by this monster.
And it definitely didn't stay localized either. It spread to 150 countries. We're talking from Southeast Asia to Latin America to Spain, France, Germany, and the UK. Train stations, corporate offices, and schools literally woke up with WannaCry's mark on their screens. But here is the most staggering number of the whole event: 2. All of that global devastation, 200,000 computers across 150 countries, that happened in just 2 hours of the worm going operational. That self-propagating nature of EternalBlue we talked about, it made this thing move at the speed of light.
But we have to remember, this wasn't just a massive IT headache for big corporations. This had severe, immediate real-world consequences. Take the UK's National Health Service, for example, which saw a full 1/3 of its infrastructure collapse. Doctors, like Tony Bleatman, who was working a busy emergency shift in London, suddenly lost all access to digital records. They literally had to revert to old-fashioned whiteboards and markers just to track where their patients were. Surgeries were postponed, non-essential operations were totally stopped, and critical patients had to be diverted because life-saving support systems were completely locked down. This was a massive real-world health crisis playing out in real time.
Now, while hospitals were scrambling to save lives, a 22-year-old UK security researcher named Marcus Hutchins was logging on from his childhood bedroom. Around 2:30 p.m., on his day off no less, he sees the news, manages to get a sample of the malware, and dives straight into the code. And almost immediately, he spots his really weird anomaly. Before deploying its destructive payload, the WannaCry worm was trying to connect to a very long, very random, completely unregistered web domain. Thinking it might be some sort of command and control server, Marcus just registered the domain for about $10 to see what it would do.
And by doing that, Marcus accidentally became a global hero. He had somehow stumbled upon a kill switch. Now you might be wondering, why on earth was a kill switch built into this thing? Well, malware creators often use tricks to evade sandboxes, which are basically virtual computers used by researchers to safely study viruses. The WannaCry programmers coded the worm so that if it successfully connected to this specific domain, it would assume it was being watched in a researcher's sandbox, and it would automatically shut itself down to avoid analysis. But, and this is wild, they were incredibly sloppy. Instead of generating a unique domain for every single infection, they hard-coded a single static domain into the entire global batch of malware. So by registering that one single domain, Marcus tricked every active WannaCry worm on the entire planet into thinking it was in a sandbox. The global spread instantly halted, just like that.
So the active destruction was over, but the investigation? That was just getting started. Investigators quickly realized the WannaCry attack was oddly sloppy. It actually barely made any money, and its payment tracking system was totally broken. Honestly, it felt like an unfinished, accidentally released testing version. By analyzing the digital fingerprints left behind, they found striking similarities to the 2014 Sony hack and the 2015 Bangladesh heist. I mean, they used the same Visual C++ development environment. They reused the exact same IP addresses. They even shared the same network of fake email accounts. This sheer sloppiness allowed investigators to trace the entire attack directly back to North Korea's military hacking unit, the Lazarus Group, and eventually pinpoint the exact programmer we met at the very beginning of our story, Park Jin Hyok.
But, pointing the finger solely at North Korea kind of ignores a massive part of the equation here. By the end of 2017, the White House officially blamed Pyongyang, but they conveniently glossed over the origins of the actual weapons used. Microsoft President Brad Smith, however, he didn't hold back at all. He compared the NSA losing EternalBlue to the US military having its Tomahawk missiles stolen, and this sparked a massive, ongoing geopolitical debate. Because remember, the NSA had known about this Windows vulnerability since 2012, but instead of warning Microsoft so they could protect users, they kept it a secret to build a weapon they then entirely failed to secure.
Which leaves us with this final, really heavy, lingering question. When governments hoard digital weapons in the name of national security, who is really kept safe? The WannaCry disaster was absolutely fueled by North Korea's malice, sure, but we can't forget it was enabled by a chain of events that started with intelligence agencies hoarding exploits. It's a stark, terrifying reminder that in our hyper-connected world, a weapon built in secret can very quickly become a global nightmare for all of us. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions, and I will see you next time.